Hi, this is Rich Harrington for the Photo Focus podcast, and today we are sitting down with a special guest, Joel Grimes. Joel is both an artist and a photographer, and many of you may be familiar with some of his classes that he also offers. We're going to explore a lot of different things with him. Joel, how are you doing today?
Well, great, Rich. Thanks for having me on this.
Excellent. Well, I've encountered you and have taken some classes from you through the years at different conferences, and you always have an interesting approach to photography. For those who aren't familiar with your work, can you describe some of the types of images you make most often, the types of photographs you enjoy making, and what you're often hired to do?
Well, I started out in high school studying photography. Didn't really know I'd make a living with my camera for the rest of my life or as an occupation. But when I got out of high school, I didn't know what to do. I thought if I got on working at the copper mines down in Tucson, that would be a great something that I could make a living. I didn't know. I didn't have any. My parents are kind of my dad was a fireman. I think he wanted me to be a fireman, but as a career choice, I was kind of lost there for a little bit. But I got really lucky in that I was working at an Army surplus store down in downtown Tucson, and the professor from Pima Community College that had started the photography program out there came in to look for a waterproof case. Back then, there wasn't Pelican cases and all the stuff we have today. And I had the summer before into the fall, I had worked two jobs. One was parking cars at a dealership, and then I bussed tables at night. And with that money, I bought my first camera. I bought a Canon EF. It was an all-black camera. It was the first automatic exposure camera that ever had come out on the market. And I thought I was in heaven. I thought, having this camera hanging around my neck, I thought that was the coolest guy on the block. So when this professor walked in and he said, I'm looking for this case, waterproof case. I said, what's it for? And he said, I'm a photographer and it's for, keeping my gear dry. I go, photographer? Well, I'm a photographer. And he said, really? Have you taken any classes in college? I said, well, no, I didn't really know much about what to do there in terms of, getting a degree or anything. And he goes, why don't you come out to one of my classes? And little did I know he had a waiting list of over 80 students trying to get into his classes. And he let me in. I got in, I just signed a piece of paper or whatever from the administration, got in. And the very first, I think I was about a couple days late from the semester had already started. But the first day I remember him saying, photography is not just a way to document the world around you, but it's also an opportunity to be an artist and have it as a creative outlet. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. I want to be an artist. I don't know why, right. But I sat there going, that just spoke to me. And I've been chasing that that's 40 plus years ago. And I've been trying to be an artist with the camera. And then I eventually went on to ASU, 2 years at ASU, and then finished up at U of A, got my degree, a BFA in photography.
Nice.
So, but I did those years that I studied photography was all landscape. I wanted to be, the grand landscape master photographer like Ansel Adams, and I think there were a lot of students like me. And a large format, I shot 4x5 at the time, primarily for large format. I absorbed everything about the zone system, black and white photography. Working the large format cameras, everything optics. I was absorbed with trying to be a really good photographer. And then when I graduated, I found out
there's not a lot of jobs for landscape photography.
There's not. And I had this buddy.
It's a great hobby. It's just hard to make a living at.
Yeah. Well, and I had this this buddy who went to Art Center in Pasadena, got a degree in the more commercial side of photography. And so we hooked up, and while he was in LA at the time, he said, come on out and assist the photographer I'm working for, Bill Robbins. He was a celebrity photographer. So I went out there and, here I'm this kid from Tucson, didn't have a clue that we're a big world. They used to tease me all the time about, coming from Tucson to LA, and they'd make jokes about me because they'd make a statement. I go, huh? Like, what is that? I'm from Tucson. Well, anyways, a couple months studying there or assisting Bill Robbins. And then I ended up my friend Steve and I said, "Oh, let's go start our own studio." And he was from Amarillo, and he said, "Let's go to Houston." I'm like, "Houston? That's too humid." And I said, "Well, let's go to Seattle," because I was thinking of the Pacific Northwest. And he's like, "Well, what's in between?" Denver. So we ended up in Denver. We didn't know anybody. We got there, went downtown, and found this old warehouse. Back in those days, you could find warehouse space. And we started building a studio out. And again, I'm all landscape. I don't know anything about portraits. Even though I assisted this guy, Bill, for a couple of months, I was like, I had no strobe experience, none in terms of the commercial side of things. And my friend Steve was Mr. Gung-Ho marketer. So, he said, "Okay, here's what we got to do. We got to start making cold calls." And I'm like, "What?" I mean, I was a green.
You were afraid of the camera still, and he was ready to sell it.
Yeah. So because I had the large format experience, he said, "Why don't you do architecture photography?" I'm like, "Oh, okay, whatever." So I went out and I took that large format camera and I started going all over Denver, early morning, late light. I shot every building I could find, and I got, a fairly decent set of 4x5 transparencies, put them in a portfolio. And that was my first knocking on doors was architectural firms, and started getting a few jobs. I mean, again, it was pretty sparse, but that first year I ended up making, because I logged them all in. I didn't have a computer, but we had 3x5 cards at the time. This was 1984. So I started, tracking all my calls, because you had to make sure you knew who you called, what you said, when you called them, whatever, or if they said call back at, in 2 months or whatever. And I logged in 3,000 cold calls, and I showed my portfolio about 200 times. I expanded from architecture to going to design firms, eventually to ad agencies. But that first year of making cold calls and showing a portfolio really launched my future business, because I learned how to do something I didn't want to do, which was to exert myself in the marketplace. And
Well, I think that ratio is important there, because a lot of people have a hard time with rejection. So, you made 3,000 calls to get 200 yeses, but 200 yeses was probably enough to make a living, at least, to keep you motivated on the path.
And this is great. So I had 3,000 cold calls, 200 portfolios. I got about 10 jobs.
Okay.
So not a real good start, but basically I could almost say one
but
job.
Not bad enough that it scared you off.
Well, it was slim pickings. You're broke when you go to deliver the job and you don't have enough money for the parking meter. So you drive around until you see someone pull out of a meter, and that's got 15 minutes or so left. And you pull in, you run upstairs, and you deliver the job. You run down, and by the time you get down, it's been 18 minutes, and you get a ticket. And then that $20 ticket is $40 because you can't pay it right away. And then eventually they boot your car, which is $150. Next thing you know, you're in jail. I mean, I always say it costs a lot of money to be broke.
Right.
So, but those are the early days. Little by little, I started to build my portfolio, getting some strobe experience. I didn't, we have so many resources today that if you say, well, how do I use a strobe? Well, go to YouTube or whatever, go to a class, buy a a tutorial on strobe lighting, whatever. I didn't have that back then. There were some books on lighting, but I think they were, when I say they fell short of teaching someone how to use strobes or how to use lighting, they would show a picture and then they show a schematic. I say schematic meaning that it's like a bird's eye view looking down. They'll show a little figure. They'll have a little picture of an umbrella off to one side, and then they'll say a fill card, and then they'll show a picture of a background.
Sure. And if you have an engineering background, it might make sense, or for certain people it makes sense, but it lacks the 3D nature, and it's not nearly as effective as learning by video or learning by working with an apprenticeship where you could actually see the equipment and touch it.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, I always say this: when you have an umbrella and you have a strobe, right? And you see a picture of this, a schematic picture of an umbrella with a strobe in it. What that doesn't tell you is that, number one is what hood do you have on your strobe? How wide is that hood? So if you put a standard hood, I think it's 50 degrees or something, so you put that umbrella on, you slide the rod through the strobe, and then you take and you put that strobe in. Well, how far do you slide the umbrella away, or the strobe away from the umbrella, right? Is that strobe actually hitting and spreading light to the whole umbrella? Well, no, I didn't know that. I had a 50 degree hood on a standard, strobe, and I had it about, 20 inches from the umbrella. So if you actually took your camera and shot a picture of the umbrella, you'd have this hot spot in the center. You have a 60-inch umbrella, but you're only using 20 inches of the actual fabric of illuminating the white fabric. So I'd set that up and I'd shoot a portrait with that, and it was really harsh. I'm thinking, well, umbrellas suck, right? So I put a softbox on. Well, actually, when I started, there were no softboxes, no companies that were building softboxes. You could make your own out of foam core and tracing paper, and they catch on fire, and
Well, that was fun.
yeah. Or you use a flat, and you'd shoot into a flat, which I still didn't understand what that. I didn't understand anything about all that. Anyways, my point is I had no experience with strobe. Nobody was really teaching me, but I had one thing that is the greatest single, I guess you would say, education that I needed. Was I studied art history, and I studied the Baroque Renaissance painters. I understood the value of modeling and building depth in a painting, because you study the Baroque painters. They went from the flat paintings to the Rembrandt, the Baroque Renaissance time. They started modeling their subjects, building shadows and depth and 3D in their paintings, and that stuck with me. So so I had my first attempt to do a strobe portrait was Rembrandt Crosslight. Well, but I didn't know where to put the stupid strobe or the softbox. Well, click, you take a picture, and you go, no, that didn't work. Move it, click, take a picture. And the next thing I know, I figured out where to put that light. And then for 25 years, every single ad campaign I did was one light, cross light. I made no attempt to go and do hair lights or edge lights or multiple lights or a beauty dish over the top. There was no such thing as a beauty dish when I started out, but I never put a light over the top of the camera or above the camera. It was all Rembrandt cross light. I mean, that's all I knew. That's all I wanted to do. And it served me well for 25 years. It wasn't until I was 50 years old. I'm 63 now. So 13 years ago, I said, maybe there's more to, maybe I need to learn something. Right. And I started experimenting with lights, and I said, I don't really know what I'm doing. And I was shooting huge dollar ad campaigns. I knew that Rembrandt cross light to the T. I'd shot 20,000 portraits, maybe, I don't know, in 25 years. But I didn't know how to go and do anything outside of there. So I sat down and I started experimenting. I came up with that two edgy light, one light over the top of the camera. I started shooting sports figures. The next thing I know, I started shooting $100 million athletes and doing huge ad campaigns with that technique. And that technique sort of hit the marketplace. And that's what a lot of people know me from, is that it's a three light. I call it the edgy light kind of approach. But
And when you were coming up with this process, was it trial and error? Was it studying others for inspiration? A little mixture? Obviously you had something that worked, but you decided that you weren't satisfied with your photography, I guess. You decided to push yourself, it sounds like.
yeah, well, so, I always say lighting is broken down very simply. The bigger the source in relation to the subject, the softer the light. So if I take a softbox and I bring it in, it's going to get softer. Of course, you got to compensate for the exposure. But if I bring it in, it's going to be softer to the subject. If I back it up, it's going to be harsher, right? Well, I didn't know that. I'd been shooting ad campaigns for 50 years or for 25 years. I didn't know that, but I kind of knew a little bit about it. But I didn't understand that sort of I always say, the basic fundamentals of lighting. I didn't understand how to make my light necessarily softer or harsher. But so what happened was I was shooting the Olympic boxers that went to Athens. All, again, one light cross light, but I was shooting large format 4x5 type 55 Polaroid. And I was got invited to do this the portraits of the boxers that went to Athens. It was the USA Boxing Association or whatever hired me. Anyways, and I'm there, and I'm sitting there photographing this boxer, and I thought, what if I added a rim light? Never in my life I had used a rim light. I thought, what if I added a rim light? And I just pulled out this light, second light with a little grid, and I just shot it across, and I hit a little bit of light on the shoulder, a little bit on the cheek, and a little, the side, just a little bit. And I did this one, shot, and I was like, well, that's kind of cool. Why I've never done that before? Why haven't I ever done that before? And so, and then digital had already started to come along a little bit, and I was starting to experiment with digital a bit. And um, when I said, well, I'm gonna reinvent myself, and I bought this beauty dish. It was a Policy Buff beauty dish. It was metal and hard shell, hard metal. And I tried it once with, I brought my kid out, one of my kids, and I shot a picture of him, and I go, this thing's terrible. And it hung on a hook for a couple of years. And then I thought, I'm going to try something different, totally different. And it wasn't from seeing another photograph. I wasn't copying something, but I just said, what if I put that light right over the top and got 2 edge lights? I don't know why I said that. I say this I think it was a divine, something happened. I don't understand it. And I tell this story, and I've told it teaching before, but I brought this athlete in, and I was actually in the living room of my house. We pushed the couches back, got originally had a gray sweep, and then I ended up putting black cloth over the whole thing. So I had a black background. I put 2 edge lights up. I put the beauty dish over the top. And what I did was I started shooting, again, digital, but the digital was, if you remember how those small little screens, they were so tiny you could hardly see anything on them. And I just started powering down my overhead light until the edge lights really popped, but there was still little value in his face. And I got it, and it was on black background. It's like, and I wish the viewers could see that picture, but it was the very first time I ever tried that a technique. And I was like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So I go, and he left, and then I took the camera after he left. I took it over to my wife, and I say she was doing laundry. I don't know, but it was in another room. I came in, I said, honey, you got to see this picture. And I'm showing to her, and I said, she goes, yeah, that looks pretty cool. And I go, no, I go, you don't understand. This is going to change my life. And she goes, yeah, whatever. And I tell her,
that is the secret to a happy marriage is when the 2 partners are interested in other things.
Well, she says today, like I tell that story, she goes, I wasn't that disinterested, because she usually is pretty interested in what I'm doing. But the point is I was all excited, and I was thinking, this is going to change my life, right? And I said that statement not knowing what the future obviously was going to be, and it really did change my life. It put me on the map. It put me in a whole new level of people following my work. And since that time, though, what I did was I said, well, why is this so dramatic, and why is it working? And so I started experimenting. So one day I took a light, and I said, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And I said, what happens is if I back that light up 20 feet or it's 2 feet? What does it do? And so I started plotting this out. And since I say I'm not the smartest guy on the planet, but I was barely a C student, and I'm partially, I say partially, I don't even know, but I'm dyslexic to a point where I don't like if you give me your phone number, I got to go, okay, what was that again? You got to say it to me, 10 times, because I numbers, abstract things like that, I have a hard time sinking in. I just don't absorb it. So a classroom was a very difficult place for me to be. But visually, I can solve things. I can rebuild an engine. I can put an engine back together. I can do things that, defy logic in some ways, but it has to be visually. So when I started trying to crack the code to lighting, I had to do it all visually. I mean, I had to, instead of working with fractions or ratios or things like that, or, like the inverse square law, and then, you get all these fractions, and I'm like, no. I have to see it. And of course, now with digital, I had a way of pop and then taking a look at it on the monitor immediately, but even though it wasn't very big, I could still see, I don't like that. What do I do? Change it up
And that's nice because it gives you that opportunity to experiment and learn. I mean,
in real
I think
time.
for a lot of folks, that real-time feedback is important. Plus, now the fact that all the settings are logged into your image, so you
Yes,
could see what you did, you could study your mistakes. I
exactly.
always tell people, don't delete the mistakes or the bad photos when you're in the field. Take them back home and take the time to learn from them. Sometimes you find little gems in there that you might not have seen on the back of the camera, and other times you go, "Oh, that's what happened." So you can learn from that mistake.
Yeah. Well, and so the digital actually was, I think, a transforming time in my life because, like you say, real time. I shot Polaroid, on medium format backs and on a large format, but you couldn't go and just do for. I mean, it was like a couple bucks a pop, right? I mean, you had
Right.
to be somewhat selective. But what happened is all of a sudden the heavens opened. I say jokingly, the heavens opened and the beam of light struck me, and I was like, this all makes sense. And so I started to create images. I started doing composites, building a body work at a really high speed, just cranking them out like crazy. And I was working, I mean, 15 hours a day, if not longer. And all of a sudden, um, this whole mystery of lighting completely took, uh, I made sense to me. And all of a sudden and I hate to always say, I'm an expert at anything, but in terms of understanding lighting, and you can take a look at my work, that's the proofs in the pudding, is all of a sudden it made sense to me. And there's not a lighting technique that means you show me a picture, I can light it. I know exactly how to light it. I can duplicate any photograph on the planet because I now have this understanding of how light works. And it all made sense visually to me. And so when I teach it in a very visual, hands-on approach. And that doesn't work for everyone, by the way, because I do workshops and people want to have all the formulas. And I go, no,
Right.
that's not how I teach. That's not how I learn.
Well, those are the same people. I mean, there's something to be said for studying how something is made, but when I see people post, "These are the camera settings I used," my mind immediately goes, "Well, that's great if I'm shooting with the same camera under the same lighting conditions, but there's so many variables." Instead of worrying about the settings, it really comes down to mastering that exposure triangle, thinking about the relationship of time and
Right.
shutter speed and sensitivity. What were as you started experimenting with light and you've come up with your look, I'd like to talk about what you feel is most important in that lighting approach. And then I'd also like you to talk a little bit more about your composites. So let's start with that approach to lighting. When you are lighting a subject, what are the things, what's your mental checklist that you go through before you capture that portrait? Are there any key things you're looking at that you think are just essential to a great portrait?
Well, so if you go back to the Renaissance Baroque painters that use cross light, I use the term cross light. It's light that's coming across the subject, so you have a highlight on one side of the face, and it goes to a shadow on the other side. And then if you get the light right, there will be a triangle on the one side of the cheek that we call the Rembrandt Triangle. Okay, so it's cross light. I mastered it. I used it. That's emulating what we'd call natural light from a window or a window source. You're inside of a room kind of thing, but you're emulating this window light coming across the subject. It's absolutely the most beautiful light on the planet, or at least it's one of those. I always say, it's absolutely gorgeous. And I built a career on that. I built a career on one lighting technique, right? Now, if I go outside and we have the sun can be diffused. It can be early, or it can be late in the evening. It can be straight over the top. Straight over the top is not very flattering because it's raking across the face. So I always say, what's flattering light? Okay. Well, that's subjective. I don't know. My definition of what's flattering light may be different than yours, but we might have a consistent, a general. If you get 10 photographers in a room, they'll say, no, high noon light reeking across your face in the middle of the desert. It's not very flattering. But I did know what beautiful light cross light looked like, and I again built a career on it. Now that's emulating what we'd say is a source that's pretty what we call um, prevalent, meaning that we all know what a light from a window looks like hitting a subject. We see it all the time. It's we call it north light. The north light side of the house is creating a soft light. Um, and then, like I said, early morning light, we might go, that's good light, or late light, we might say that's good light. Beautiful light on the subject. If you look at my 3 light approach, the 2 edge lights with an overhead light, that's not a very common lighting scenario in the real life. So the only time you might see it is if you have 2 windows. You're in a room, there's 2 windows behind the subject, and there's a skylight or a door behind the photographer, right? So you get
Right.
2 edge lights coming through from the windows, and then you get a little bit of fill from let's say a door or a skylight. So I've actually found that, and I've actually shot a portrait so it's all natural. I shoot it. It looks pretty close to that attempt that I'm making with the edgy lights. But you don't see it very often. So why would I go and create a whole body of work with a lighting scenario that's not done very often? It's not in the real world. We don't see it very often. Well, partially is because we're human beings that get bored very easily. We see the same thing, we get bored. And so we want something new. So I always say that if I take a picture of a waterfall and I use a high shutter speed, the water's frozen. We look at it. That's kind of what I see when I'm standing there. Even though the water's moving, I don't see it if I do a 10-second exposure or a 30-second exposure. Just all the soft, right? So if I'm a photographer and I want something that's unique, or I say unique, but interesting, I'd probably do a long exposure on a waterfall because it's not what I see every day. So
it's one of the same reasons that I capture time lapse, because when you create content that you can't see with the naked eye or that you don't encounter all the time, that's what draws people to it. It's the same reason why we tell people, if you want interesting photos, stop shooting everything at eye level, because
exactly.
that's how everything looks like.
Because it's boring. We've seen it so many times, right? So when I did the 2 edge light, but three light approach to these athletes that I was doing, it was different enough to where people stop. It's dramatic. Okay. If you have a 6-pack and you have a light cutting across your 6-pack, it looks pretty darn good, So if you do, 1,000 sit-ups a day and a photographer captures that 6-pack with little bumps and shadows, they're going, thank you. That makes me look even more, ripped. And so the lighting worked for very, very well in a sort of for the athletes and stuff, and really dramatic. And so I started
In a way, it sounds a little bit like you are shooting it. This may sound strange, but it's a little bit like product photography. You're accentuating the features and bringing that to life. Because when we light products, we often have to use multiple lights so that it looks good from all sides, because we want to control where the shadows are, not just rely on something looking like a still life in many cases.
Exactly. Well, and so from my whole life, I was using a soft light. Now all of a sudden I'm using edgy light cutting across. Yeah, you're right, your subject. And it gave it this really dramatic look. And there's another side benefit to this approach is that when I started doing composites, if I did a edgy sports scenario and then I shot a background in the field somewhere and then brought used that studio shot, cut them out, drop them in, the edgy light kind of worked really well. So for example, let me give you an example. If I shoot a cross light portrait, so the light's coming from the right cheek going across and shadowing on the left side of the cheek. And then I take and cut that out. Let's say I do it in a studio. I cut that out and I put it in a background. I can't have the light going the opposite way in the background. I'd have to flip that so that the light source is coming from the same direction on the subject to the same direction in the background. If you don't do that, if let's say you by mistake the light's going in one direction on the subject and another direction in the background, you could put that together and you may go, oh, that looks kind of cool. You put it out there, people are going to look at it and their brain is going to go, something's not right here, right? They may not know what it is, but they're going, something's not right. It doesn't look. I always say you're not selling the fake. So if I do, and I have done some cross-light scenario composites, I make for sure that I have both sources of light going in the same direction. With the edgy, so two edge lights and then an overhead light, I could put it in there and there's light in an old alley or an old parking garage or in a stadium or whatever. And it just like, especially stadiums where you got the subject, and I've shot, national ad campaigns with subjects and they're in a stadium and those two edge lights were absolutely incredible. It's like, it's just somehow it just flies off the page, right? And so I didn't know that when I first started. I wasn't thinking ahead of it. I'm not that smart, but it kind of worked with my composites, with sports. It all kind of came together. The techniques I was using with the retouching side, the desaturation, the little grainy grunginess of everything, all worked together. And I went out and I shot hundreds of athletes and if not thousands of backgrounds. 10 years I shot for 10 years. I shot backgrounds every time I go somewhere. Sunday mornings or whatever, I get up early. I shoot backgrounds.
Do you shoot the backgrounds with the subject in mind, or do you just build up a large library so you have a lot of choices? And then when you meet your subjects, you remember something. Oh, I got a perfect background for that.
Yes, I was my own stock agency, basically. That's
Okay.
how I looked at it. And so, but yeah, and it's a marriage. It's a marriage between, does this background work with this subject? And sometimes I go, oh, this is going to work really good. I put it in, doesn't work very good. So I try another background. Um, and again, it's not as thought out as most people think. A lot of times I'll do a photograph and they go, oh, that is brilliant. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you. I just kind of grabbed the background and, it worked and okay, all right. But
Did you always did everyone know you were compositing, or did you just avoid that, or do you just say that's part of the style? Because some folks get weird about composites. Oh,
oh,
that's not natural.
oh,
That wasn't there.
12, 13 years ago, I got all sorts of grief. And I'll give you an example. And this is a great kind of a transition into this concept. And I think it's very important to understand. I think most of us, when we start out in photography, somehow, if we are a painter, you can say, I'm going to put a pine tree over here. There's no pine tree. You're at Yosemite and you're doing a Yosemite, landscape, and you go, oh man, that stupid tree's in the wrong spot. I'm going to put it over here. Let's better composition over here. And with painting, you have some liberty to do that, I guess. Because first of all, if you take that painting hanging on a wall, no one's standing at that vista that you just got through painting. And so they don't know you took the tree, moved it, 20 feet to the right. So there's a license to, you kind of interpret the landscape the way you want as an artist. Okay. Photography is different though. Photography is like, you take a picture, you go, that's the way it is right there. You can't move that pine tree. Right. And, because photography is reality, right? It's just showing the way it really is. Right. So going through, college, getting a degree in photography and everything, I still kind of looked at photography as reality. It's an interpretation of the world around me in a way that's as real as you can get, right? Well, when I started doing back in '85, I had a studio mate, and he took a strobe outdoors. It was a Norman 200B, and then eventually I had Norman 400Bs. Pretty powerful. They weren't like a little speed light; they're a little more powerful. But when I wanted to go do a commercial shoot outdoors, you'd get a generator. I mean, you get studio strobes off a generator. Well, little by little, the marketplace started getting strobes that were a little more powerful. We started putting them in soft boxes and stuff. And one of the things I liked about shooting strobe outdoors is I could, if I had a high speed sync, I could overpower the sun, and I could take, if I had enough power, I could take and light the subject and then darken the background. Well, I started experimenting with 1985. I started experimenting with that, and I came up with this sort of little combination of strobing, cross light, but still strobing, and then having the background darken, and the subject would pop off the background. So I would, back then we didn't have social media and all this stuff, but I would, the lab would print one of my big prints and put it in that lab, and you go to the lab and someone says, oh, I love your print. That image is a beautiful portrait. That's amazing. That light was just incredible. I go, oh, well, I strobed it. You strobed it? They go, you're playing God. You can't do that. You can't go and strobe a subject outdoors. That's not real. I go, yeah, but it's kind of cool. They go, Yeah, but you're cheating. Well, you think that's funny now because I mean, well, we everybody strobes
Cheating
out.
is the whole purpose of photography.
Yeah,
We freeze moments in time.
yeah.
It's never
But I'm
real.
saying I got grief 1984, 1985. I got grief for taking a strobe, a softbox outdoors and knocking down the background, which is not what our eye sees, right?
Right.
Well, I built that look. It launched me into doing campaigns, ad campaigns and stuff. And um, well, eventually everybody started strobing outdoors. So the reason why I say that is that when I started doing composites, I got the exact same, uh, you know, kind of fallback or pushback where I'd show a picture and they go, "Oh, that's really great. You got that athlete in that studio or in that stadium." I said, "Well, no, actually, it's two parts." What? I go, "No, it's a composite." What? Oh, you can't do that. That's cheating. I go, well, why is it cheating? It's an image. You thought it was real. You thought I sold the fake to you. Why is it cheating? Well, so for a year, I battled. I got, by then I was on social media, or I say social media, I was on Flickr, was the
Right.
first, kind of thing. And people would, or they'd email me too, because I had my email on there, which I should have never done. But anyways, they go, you're a cheater. You can't do that. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, whatever. So I start to defend it and it would say, well, Ansel Adams, when he went in the dark room, he manipulated or put a filter on. Well, he shot in black and white, anyways. That's not reality, anyways. So I started formulating in my mind this concept that photography. We keep thinking photography is reality. Well, it's not. Every photograph is a fake. It's not real. It's two dimensional. It's a representation of the world around us. And the thing is to be current or to be interesting, you have to make images that people want to stop and look at. And so I'm an artist, and so I go and my work, my craft to where people go, oh my gosh, your jaw hits the floor, and they go, that's incredible, right? That's what you want as an artist. So I had friends that were doing photography during this time, 12, 13 years ago when I started doing composites, and they gave me all sorts of grief. I mean, we're talking, you know, red in your face, fingers screaming at you, saying you're a cheater. You can't be doing this. You're not a photographer. And so one day, I had that revelation at 19 when my professor at the Lubernal at Pima College said, photography is not just a way to document the world around you, but it's a way of being an artist and to have a creative outlet, right? So all of a sudden, one day I sat there and I thought, wait a minute, I keep defining myself as a photographer. And then everyone has a definition that's a little different. And then I get this pushback because I'm defining photography with two parts, subject in the studio, cut them out, put them in the background, and people scream bloody murder. And I thought, you know what?
And in the movie industry, this is how almost every movie is
I
made
know,
these
I know, I
days.
know. But I thought all of a sudden, I'm I'm not a photographer. I'm an artist with a camera, with a set of tools. I'm just an artist with a set of tools. And you know what? It changed everything for me. When I say that, it was like all of a sudden overnight, I now no longer wore a badge that I'm a photographer. I still say to this day, I say I'm a photographer because what do if I say I'm an artist, what does that mean? I could be a painter, but at that moment in my mind, I let go of this badge or this brand that I was a photographer. I said, now I'm an artist with a set of tools, and the gloves are off. And that was about a year into my compositing. And all of a sudden, the next couple of years, my work just exploded on a whole new level. I started doing things that people were going, wow, how in the world do you come up with these ideas? I go, because I'm an artist with a set of tools. I'm no longer a photographer. A photographer was a chain and ball that hung, that held me down. And today, to this day, if someone wants to say they're a photographer and they want to do it all in camera, fine. I am 100% high five it. Go for it. But for me, I find the ability to have the freedom to go take parts and pieces and create an image that we could say has a representation of reality, but it's really a representation, or it's a touch of fantasy. It's a world of make believe in which I'm sucking somebody into that they go, wow, they stop, whatever you get, what, 3 seconds? They say you get 3 seconds. That's your audience today.
Yes,
If you
that's
get
about the right
five,
time.
you've done really well, right? 5 seconds of viewing. But so my work changed drastically when I had a different mindset. And the mindset is that I'm not trying to go and be a traditional photographer. Again, nothing's wrong with that. What I'm trying to do is be an artist and create things that I want to hang on my wall. And it really did transform my work, and it launched me to where I'm at today. And so, obviously, you know me from teaching and whatever. I didn't set out to teach. What happened was people were going, "Who's this Joel Grimes? This guy's like rocking it. What's he? He's like doing crazy things, And for an old guy, because I was 50 years old when I started this journey that I'm on right now with the composites and everything. I wasn't 25, but I was competing in a world with 25-year-old photographers or 30-year-old photographers that were young and very energetic and trying new things. But it really was all because of that mindset. And obviously the tools have changed too. And I fell in love with Photoshop, the ability to do things in Photoshop, manipulating my images. And so that's where I'm at today. Now, I don't do a lot of composites today anymore. I do some, but I'm doing some crazy things today that are more in camera, that
Have you
are
tried
really.
doing your composites with the double exposure, or
Oh,
because you?
I'm just got through. I'm editing right now the beauty portrait masterclass. I'm doing double strobing, masking in camera. Well, it's in camera, but there's two parts in the camera. Then I take it into Photoshop and I use those two parts. One's a silhouetted, one's a lit. Again, it's hard to explain, but I just posted that on my Instagram and Facebook today. One of those images. Or yesterday it was, I think. So I'm showing that stuff more of some crazy stuff that using tools today we didn't have before. So I'm not locked into doing composites the rest of my life. I'm trying new things. I'm an artist, and so whatever tools at hand that I have that get me to my end result, I will use.
No, it makes sense. It's good to have new things that you're trying. Joel, this has been very inspirational for folks. If they want to see more of your work as well as find out some of your educational offerings, what's the best place they can go to check that out?
Well, the big portal is joelgrimes.com. That's where everything goes through there. If you want to look at my work, you can go to joelgrimes.com. Let's say my portfolio, and you can click on portfolio at the top, and it'll take you. You can follow. There's another link that takes you over, or portfolio.joelgrimes.com is where all my work is, the current work and things I'm doing. Um, and there's obviously I sell educational materials on there. I'm doing all sorts of tutorials on crazy things. I just did a master class, believe it or not, on still life. Still life, because of the lockdown. I had this idea. I had tried some still life stuff, years ago, uh, and had fun doing it. The joke was I'd go out and buy flowers for my wife, Amy, and then I'd put them in a set and photograph them. And Amy's like, "Were those flowers for me or were they for you?" I said,
It's
"Well,
the best of both
yes,
worlds. They're
exactly.
for you, but I
Yeah."
could write them off as a business expense.
But I love the idea of doing still life because it's an artist. It doesn't have to be a portrait or something that is a subject that moves.
Mhm.
And so I did this still life master class, and it's been my best seller of all time, of all my tutorials. What does that tell you? I'm a portrait
It,
photographer,
it,
and
it tells you right now that COVID has made many people try new things.
and it's that people are loving it. I've gotten the best response from people, just emails saying thank you, Joel. So that's kind of fun. I just did the beauty portrait masterclass, which will hopefully come out here. Well, this is what, middle of or 3/4 of the way through January. Should be out in a month or two. But um, I'm a when I say I'm a portrait photographer, that's what I really am drawn to. Um, and then we say beauty. How do you define beauty, or beauty fashion beauty? So I've been calling it beauty portrait photography. So it's more portraity, but on the beauty side, but experimenting a little more on the fine art side of things. Got some really cool stuff. Can't wait to share that with people. And um,
Excellent. And if you had one piece of advice for people that feel like their photography is stuck, how- you know, when you approach this as an artist, what was the biggest transformation for you? Obviously, being willing to think of yourself an artist was probably part of it. But do you have something tangible, an
Yes.
exercise or technique that they could do to just sort of get unstuck?
Well, so I had a very famous football player come to one of my workshops, former NFL football player, and um, he's now doing photography and taking up photography. And um, we got to talking, became friends. We'd have lunch every once in a while. And at one point, I can't remember how the conversation ended up, but he's like, I'm just I want to be a photographer, and what do I need to do, Joel? And I said, well, how hard did you practice your craft, uh, uh, your football skills to get into the NFL? And he said, 24/7 or whatever. Every free minute I was awake, I worked toward that goal. And I said, that's how hard you have to work to be a photographer and to compete in the marketplace. And a year later, he came to me and said, that's the best advice anyone's ever given me. Because we kind of think, oh, yeah, I'm a photographer. Okay, I'm going to grab a subject. But um, one of the things that I say, and you're on stage speaking to a group of people. There's a lot of photographers that are on the circuit or up on stage. You go to when we used to have a gathering of photographers, uh, but like a Photo Plus or WPPI or whatever, and you say there's someone on stage that's been invited to speak. What separates that person on stage from the person that's sitting in the audience? And I say, because if you follow that person that's on stage, you follow them around for a week, they'll wear you out because they're putting in a lot of time to master their craft. They take it so serious that they're not spending all weekend watching sports and drinking beer. They're working their butt off to go and hone their skills and get up a little bit further in their notch of the marketplace and whatever it is and that they're trying to achieve. They put in the time. So it really comes down to, if you play the guitar for 10 years, for 10 hours a day, you get pretty darn good after 10 years. And so it's how many hours you put in is going to reflect how good you get at this craft. Now, we can't all put in 10 hours a day, or 12 or 15, whatever it is. Because we might have kids at home. We got to take care of our kids, and we, might have a full-time job. We're doing photography on the weekends. But the way I say it is this: is that and we all know this, that we waste time. I waste time. I gotta catch myself. But my wife Amy will tell you that I don't sit still for very long. I don't sit there and just do nothing. I'm always working toward uh, uh, furthering my goal to be a photographer, or artist, or whatever you want to call it, to make a living with my camera. I'm always doing something, and so my encouragement to people is that look at, if you want to be a working photographer, you got to look at uh, advancing your career by taking every free minute you possibly can, and you work toward that goal. Eventually, you can quit your daytime job or whatever it is, your full time job, and you can start applying your skill set to make a living with your camera. I talk a lot about the business side of photography. I have tons of tutorials on that. Being an artist and a business person and making a very good living with your camera. But really, it comes down to time. Now, and this, Rich, I'm sure, and we all know this, that you have a problem and you sit there and you scratch your head. My son Ben is doing car photography. He'll come to me and go, Dad, I can't figure this out. I go, Ben, I'll bet you if you keep doing this, in 3 days from now, you'll have it figured out. And he always calls me back and he says, figured it out. And a lot of times we get to a roadblock and we just stop. We get discouraged and we quit. And I always say, just work through that, whatever that hump is, just work through it and you'll get it. Eventually you go, oh, that's not as hard as I thought it was. Now it makes total sense to me. So if you're trying to learn lighting, or you're trying to learn Photoshop, or whatever it is, you come to a roadblock and you go, I can't do this. You start pulling your hair out. Or I can't get clients, don't hire me, whatever. You just keep at it, and eventually you'll get past that. And next thing you know, you're making a living with your camera. You're having fun, living your dream. So put in the time.
Excellent. And I know that sometimes folks are looking for an easy answer, but that is a big part of it, is persistence, and being willing to push through the hard parts does certainly make sense. Well, Joel, this has been very inspirational. I appreciate you taking the time to share some practical advice with folks. And I hope everything continues to go well for you as you continue to find new techniques, and thank you for sharing those.
Thanks, Rich. I appreciate that.